Hello, Jerry here. Welcome back to the Old Testament prophets. 3 weeks ago, we saw in Daniel chapter 5 the fall of the kingdom of Babylonia and its capital Babylon to Medo-Persia in 539 BC. Now, remember back when everybody was feeling the dread of Babylon? Well, now Babylon herself took her turn, being filled with dread from the Persians. Belshazzar, the co-regent king in Babylon, was killed that very night of the takeover after his big party, and King Nabonidus was allowed to live out his days somewhere else, banished from Babylonia. The great city of Babylon was taken without destruction, probably by stealth through the Euphrates River that flowed through the city. And then the new master, Cyrus of Medo-Persia, would have installed a lot of his own leaders and managers and vetted through what leaders Babylon already had. Some wouldn't have passed and were either killed, imprisoned, or banished. But some did, including the prophet Daniel, who had been hastily brought out of retirement in his 80s to interpret the handwriting on the wall for King Belshazzar, and then, if you remember, promoted to the third place in the Babylonian kingdom, which only lasted a few more hours. King Cyrus was one of a handful of memorable ancient leaders, a conqueror and yet a brilliant administrator with the leadership skills to forge a lasting empire, like Nebuchadnezzar was for the Babylonians. Only Cyrus had a more humane touch than Nebuchadnezzar, taking pride in releasing all those captives of the nations, rebuilding their temples, restoring them to their homelands, while still retaining them in the empire. That's how he bragged in his inscriptions. Under Cyrus, of course, the Jews will return to Judah and to Jerusalem with Cyrus's support. Remember, we read the prophecy of Isaiah 140 to 150 years before that names Cyrus as the human deliverer God had chosen. That's Isaiah 44 and 45. In Jerusalem today, by the way, there is a street named for Cyrus. He died 9 years after the fall of Babylon, and his tomb is still intact, respected through the ages. Well, somebody looted it of its treasure a long time ago, upon which Cyrus had inscribed, "O man, whoever you are, and wherever you come from, for I know you will come, I am Cyrus, who won the Persians their empire. Do not therefore begrudge me this little bit of earth that covers my bones." Now let's begin our story in chapter 6. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be throughout the whole kingdom. Now, who was Darius? I thought Cyrus was the king. The answer to this was obvious then, but not now. Maybe someday archaeologists will find a historical source telling us about Darius the Mede, like they did with King Belshazzar, who was unknown to history outside of the Bible until the mid-19th century. So let me just take a few minutes to dig into this, and then we'll get into the Bible story. So if you want to take a quick nap in these minutes, it's fine. Now, it could be that Darius was Cyrus's throne name, a regal title he adopted, meaning royal one. Darius was later used of 4 other Persian kings, a title like Pharaoh or Caesar. But at the end of this chapter, it also says, "So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian," which indicates they are 2 different people. But many commentators note, as the Cultural Backgrounds Study Bible writes, this can also be translated, quote, "the reign of Darius, that is, the reign of Cyrus," end quote. note the similar construction in 1 Chronicles 5:26, Pul, king of Assyria, that is Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria. So while it could be translated that way, should it be? So it's possible Cyrus was Darius. Another view is that Darius was a royal name for one of two other persons appointed to the Babylonian territory, like Ugbaru, or as the Greeks called him, Gobryas. He was mentioned in one of the cylinders of Cyrus's writings as being a governor appointed by Cyrus over Babylon and its territories. So perhaps the title of Darius the king was given to him because the Babylonians were used to obeying a king, not just a governor. Now let me quote from the Encyclopedia Iranica. And of course, the land of Iran used to be ancient Persia, so this is a good source. Ugbaru, or Gobryas, was a senior officer of Cyrus II the Great. As the leader of the Medo-Persian army of Cyrus, Gobryas took Babylon without battle on 12 October 539 BCE, according to the Nabonidus Chronicle. After his triumphant entry in the city on October 29, Cyrus appointed Gobryas governor of Babylon, who himself installed the district officials in Babylon. Thus this man seems to have been the first Persian ruler over Babylon. He, however, died soon afterwards, either in the same year, 6 November 539 BCE, or in the following year, 27 October 538. All right. Ugbaru fits nicely as the first Darius, who installed the district officials, like Daniel and others, as the first Persian ruler over Babylon, assuming that he lived on 11 months or near a year instead of a few weeks. So Daniel chapter 6 could have happened in this time. Notice Daniel 9:1. In the first year of Darius, son of Ahasuerus, by descent a Mede, who was made king over the realm of the Chaldeans, and so forth. And then Daniel 11:1. And as for me, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood up to confirm and strengthen him, and so on. The only times King Darius the Mede was mentioned outside of chapter 6 is within his first year. Perhaps because his first year was his last. Now notice Daniel 10, verse 1. In the third year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a word was revealed to Daniel, and so forth. Now, if Cyrus was Darius, why did they switch back names in chapter 10? However, this would make sense if Ugbaru ruled just a year, then he died, and then afterward they reckoned time by Cyrus. I hope that makes sense. There's another official some thought could be Darius, Gubaru. But it is now known that he was not installed as a governor of Babylon until 4 years after the fall of Babylon. But Daniel 5:30-31 says, that very night Belshazzar the Chaldean king was killed, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. There doesn't seem to be a 4-year break between Babylon's fall and Darius. So there are a few possible explanations here, unless the truth is something else we don't have any knowledge about. But they knew who he was. Okay, finally into the story. You can open your eyes again. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps, to be throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 high officials, of whom Daniel was one, to whom these satraps should give account, so that the king might suffer no loss. So the Persian kingdom would have already had this kind of satrap administrative system. It was how they did government. Darius was converting the Babylonian acquisition to a Persian government system. And we know that after 4 years, the Babylonian territories were blended into that of Medo-Persia. So this preliminary work made a lot of sense, the changing of their infrastructure. This change came out from Babylon, so that's why Daniel was involved. So 120 satraps, or officials, with 3 persons over them, so that the king might not suffer loss, the text said, that is, loss of revenue. The satraps collected, among other things I'm sure, all the taxes and revenues, and the 3 persons on top tried to limit the corruption and amount falling into the satraps' money bags, or even at the top, into the 3 top leaders' possession. Who would not have sticky fingers with all those revenues? Then this Daniel became distinguished above all the other high officials and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Not only did Daniel have no corruption, but Daniel way over-delivered. He possessed an excellent spirit. Everything he did prospered. He was so blessed and so good that the king was planning to change the governmental structure to just put Daniel on top. That's what God was doing through Daniel. And soon the circumstances will enable Daniel to give that glory to the Most High God. Then the high officials and the satraps sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom, but they could find no ground for complaint or any fault because he was faithful, and no error or fault was found in him. The news of this planned promotion was not welcomed by others, especially those 2 other top administrators. And how did many of the other 120 satraps hear about this? Well, unless the king announced this to all, the news probably streaked like lightning through these other 2 administrators to many or all of the satraps with a very negative spin, but of course cloaked as a very righteous concern. They wanted to get their support against Daniel. And what's their problem, in a word? Jealousy, isn't it? They were jealous that Daniel was getting this unprecedented promotion over all of them. Now, this is the terrible blight that sinks the effectiveness of governments or organizations. These satraps and administrators, like some of our politicians, were fixated upon who gets the credit, which side gets the credit, the higher position, not what was overall best for the nation. These Persian leaders should have applauded Daniel. Oh yeah, he'll do a great job. Now it's possible also that there was a remembrance that Daniel was a Jew from the deportations way back, and they thought no foreigner should be in such a high Persian position. But I don't think that explains all of this. Human jealousy is powerful enough. Notice they could not find ground for complaint or any fault. That is, multiple people were diligently working on this. A self-deputized, under-the-radar ad hoc committee looking for a fault with regard, quote, to the kingdom, verse 4, that is, his work. All the output from Daniel was being carefully screened, probably all those who worked around him interrogated. This is a thorough investigation. And what did they find? Nothing. Daniel was faithful to God and to all the work God gave to him. Then these men said, "We shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel, unless we find it in connection with the law of his God." So they got together again and admitted failure. Nothing at fault with his work. So let's disband the investigation because he's so innocent and we were so wrong. No, in plain demonstration of their insincerity, they pivoted their investigation and decided to comb through his personal life. Daniel was a worshiper of Israel's God. Surely there must be something about Daniel and this foreign faith that would snare him. So again, they watched him, spied on him, probably questioned those around him. And what did they find out about Daniel's religious life that was illegal? Nothing. The Persians were very generous in their religious toleration. Daniel had full religious freedom to worship his God. Oh, these conspirators were one frustrated bunch. They exhausted themselves trying to ruin Daniel. But in the midst of failure, they sparked a very clever multi-phase scheme that had a lot of promise for success. They stopped focusing on Daniel and the existing laws, and instead thought of Daniel and what the laws could be. Verse 6 is phase 1 of this brilliant plot. Then these high officials and satraps came by agreement to the king and said to him, O King Darius, live forever. All the high officials of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the counselors and the governors, are agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an injunction that whoever makes petition to any god or man for 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. Therefore King Darius signed the document and injunction. Well, because there was no law against what Daniel was doing, they induced the king to create a new law just for 30 days. They lied to the king about the real reason for the law. It was very clever, very deceptive. So phase 1, successful. They also lied to the king about the complete enthusiastic agreement among all these many satraps and administrators and others that were mentioned. Certainly Daniel didn't agree to this. How can the king say no to this huge crowd of unanimous and devoted followers? Oh, we just love serving you so much. We want to create a King Darius month. Now, I can't explain it any further what this exactly means, where they don't petition a god or a man except to the king for 30 days. But they certainly knew what it meant, and we have a general idea. While King Darius signed this doesn't necessarily mean he was successfully flattered. Maybe he was. But he could have agreed because it bolstered the political unity among all these administrators. Let them honor me in this way if they want. It won't hurt a thing, and maybe it will even help. But I really don't know. Oh, how these conspirators inwardly rejoiced when the king signed this unchangeable decree. Because of the 3 phases, this was the most difficult. They had put in a ton of on-the-clock hours trying to wreck the career of Daniel. Imagine if such an investigation had been launched against any of these conspirators. Probably would have found some stuff, right? Now, quickly to launch phase 2, which was a snap. It's so interesting. They were counting on Daniel being unmoved by the decree, should they get such a decree approved. They knew Daniel pretty well, didn't they? So it was no surprise to them that when Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house, where he had windows in his upper chamber open toward Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as he had done previously. Daniel learned of the decree, but went on with his regular habit of praying and thanking God at 3 special devoted times per day. Now, I want us to imagine how busy Daniel's day was as one of the top administrators in this new Persian kingdom. Lots of changes were being made with these new satraps and all. Daniel, in his 80s, perhaps even near 90, was very busy. Yet he took 3 times a day to face west to Jerusalem and pray. On this particular day, he had one more prayer request concerning this new law, didn't he? And he regularly gave thanks. Does Daniel have a lot to be thankful for? Yes, of course. Don't we all? He did this in his upper chamber, which was usually used for storage. They did not use storage furniture like chest of drawers and closets with hangers. The upper chamber was used for such storage. But there was a nice window up there that faced west toward Jerusalem, and this became Daniel's prayer closet. Then these men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and plea before his God. So these conspirators synchronized their sundials and met at Daniel's place at a certain time, with a fabricated reason for being there, I'm sure. And having seen what they knew they would see, they could hardly wait to tattle. Oh boy. Phase 2 complete. And now on to Phase 3. They're on a roll. Then they came near and said before the king concerning the injunction, O king, did you not sign an injunction that anyone who makes petition to any god or man within 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? Despite their excitement at Daniel being finally caught in the trap, they must have restrained themselves to act coy and innocent, and let the king affirm this law himself. The king answered and said, The thing stands fast according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be revoked. Then they answered and said before the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or the injunction you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. Then the king, when he heard these words, was much distressed. Well, why is he much distressed? Well, he really cares for Daniel, right? And Daniel is a great help to the administration. And the king was also probably distressed because he now becomes aware he was bamboozled. Our word today to take out of storage. Not a nice thing to do to the king. And there was risk in doing this because most kings aren't stupid, and they recognize when they have been manipulated. But instead of striking back, the king has other things to do for now. Then the king, when he heard these words, was much distressed, and set his mind to deliver Daniel, and he labored till the sun went down to rescue him. Which gives a hint that they spoke to the king about Daniel soon after Daniel's morning prayer. Then the king worked all day to try to find a loophole. And then evening came, but the king had not yet given the order against Daniel. Now the next verse is truly incredible. Then these men came by agreement, to the king, and said to the king, Know, O king, that it is a law of the Medes and Persians that no injunction or ordinance that the king establishes can be changed. As if the king doesn't know that already. This seems exceptionally brassy to attempt to force the hands of the king quickly here. These conspirators were really feeling their oats. They had manipulated the king into creating this law, and they all dared to stop by in the evening just to make sure the king follows through. Oh, they're pushing it, don't you think? Now, this is my subjective opinion, of course, but this story tilts the scale, in my mind, more in the direction of someone like Ugbaru being Darius, because I just cannot picture the mighty and successful King Cyrus being so played by his administrators. Cyrus was a very keen and powerful ruler, like Nebuchadnezzar, who was not only a mighty conqueror, but a strong administrative leader. Powerful rulers like them don't grow on God's human tree very often. Now, Ugbaru had been a military general and a governor, but these administrators had played him with that decree, and now they were obviously pushing Darius with such brazenness. What group in their right minds would attempt this scheme with King Cyrus, or Nebuchadnezzar, or Alexander the Great, or Napoleon? You mess with them to your peril. Though Darius will have the last word eventually. Then the king commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast into the den of lions. And so the final phase of their plot was successfully accomplished. The king gave the order against Daniel. Can you hear the conspirators celebrating? However, beyond their wildest imaginations, certainly out of view of all their contingency planning on a human horizontal level, the Most High God was at work. The same God who once encouraged his servant David, quote, "Though they intended evil against you, devised a plot, they will not succeed," end quote. Psalm 21:11. Next week, Lord willing, we'll finish this amazing story. Thanks very much.